Do we have Michael? Is he?
1 second, Renee. Sorry, I'm checking on Michael.
Okay.
Loving this riff. I hate seeing my face on the screen constantly. That's fine.
Zanad, have we added Michael as a panelist?
Yes. Anamash?
Okay. Yep. Okay, I see. I see her.
Okay.
If you can hear me, I've been promoted as a panelist, but it doesn't seem as though Michael has access.
Let me check that out. Okay. Anamash.
Is Michael using your account, Anna, or?
He should. It seems as though he sent a message was sent from my account, but he should be on his own.
Hello, can anyone hear me?
Yes.
Yeah.
Michael Miola, can I be heard?
Yes, you can.
Oh, great. Yay. Thank you. I don't know why I don't have video, but anyway.
Right? Yeah. Definitely. And I just gave him people that attended the university. It's 5. I think that's the whole capital. When I was retired, it's 2.8 million.
Oh, okay.
25,000 of rest of the other. That's 12. Yeah. I would, you have enough to do. Story.
Okay, how are we looking, Zanat?
It's all good. Yeah, I think you can start now.
Okay.
Yeah.
Welcome to Council of Urban Real Estate's Fall Affordable Housing webinar. My name is Renee Hamilton. I am a CURE board member and managing director at Helmsley Spear. Before I introduce our panelists, I want to thank you for joining us tonight. We look forward to your engagement and questions for the panel. I also invite those of you who aren't members of CURE to go to our website for more information on membership, to view past content, and to learn more about the RISE initiative, a diversity, equity, and inclusion initiative CURE is spearheading with BizNow. Also, if you are interested in being a CURE sponsor, you can reach Sonia Rockville, the treasurer of CURE, through the contact tab on our website or LinkedIn. In December, CURE will host our annual gala, Real Estate 2.0, Post-COVID Innovations in Commercial Real Estate. I will provide more information on the gala and RISE initiative at the conclusion of the program. Without further ado, let me introduce our esteemed panel.
Who wants to start? Are we?
So, Naeem, do you want to begin?
Sure, why not? Hi, my name is Naeem Brown. I am the place-based director of place-based investment at Urbane. Urbane is a community development organization that works in 3 silos: research and analytics, consulting for community development purposes, and taking all of our expertise in the first 2 and putting them to physical space, which is our place-based investment division, which is trying to create more progressive and holistic real estate through both affordable housing and economic development. So we can talk more about that. I'm happy to be on the panel. Thank you, Renee, for inviting me. I know some folks, and I've gotten to know some folks through the panel, and looking forward to it.
Thank you. Robert?
Well, I'll just keep it very simple. I'm Robert Jefferson, the Director of Housing Development, and I lead a team at Impact Brooklyn, which is formerly known as Pride Area Community Council. And basically, we just build and preserve affordable housing in Central Brooklyn.
Thank you, Robert. Janet?
Jen, I think you're on mute.
I told myself to remember that. Okay, so I'm Janet Lauren. I'm a community development officer, housing, mostly focused on lending at Local Initiative Support Corp, LISC. I've worked with Robert, so you're going to find that we all have overlap. And LISC, as a national nonprofit, has a lending presence, a presence in providing grants and program-based initiatives to support. Its primary mission was to support local initiatives, just like the name says, and so we work with a lot of the nonprofits.
Thank you. Christine?
Hi, I'm Christine Ratzlaff-O'Connell. I also work for LISC New York City with Janet. I'm the Director of Community Development Investments, which is sort of a new role focused on ramping up business with LISC so that we can make more investments in our community and broker partnerships, provide technical assistance to developers. I'm relatively new. I've been there for 7 weeks. Prior to that, I was at the New York City Department of Housing Preservation and Development. So my lens is probably going to lean more towards that experience, but I'm looking forward to being part of the panel, and thank you for the invitation.
Thanks, Christine. And last but not least, Michael Miola.
Oh, thanks, Renee. So I am Michael Miola. I'm one of the 2 partners at BJH Advisors. I'm losing my voice. We're a MWBE consulting and development firm based here in New York, though we actually practice nationally throughout the East Coast, Midwest, and we've worked in California and Florida. My business partner, Kei Hayashi, and I actually came out of New York City government and have a background in programs. We're a for-profit firm that kind of got our start on the commercial side of things, though we've done more and more affordable, housing policy and affordable housing. And Kei was very involved with the de Blasio administration's mandatory inclusionary housing program, doing the analytical work that underpinned the launch of the program. And then I can talk about some projects we're doing a little bit more later on.
Thank you. So to break right in, I'd love to get to some icebreaker questions so that our audience can get to know you a little bit better. Naeem, let's begin with you. What's the most exciting part of your work in affordable housing?
I don't know. Well, besides it being masochistic work, it's still gratifying, right? I get to talk to a lot of folks who are very, very interested in the well-being of working class citizens, right? In whatever aspect that they have, and they may have different perspectives, whether it's politicians, lenders, impact investors, foundations, tenant organizations, being able to talk to them and try to craft a product that is beneficial to them based on the context of their needs, right? So every project is completely different, it's kind of like story building, right? You kind of understand how to kind of create a template for a story, but every story is going to be totally different, right? And every project is a brand new adventure. So yeah, I've tons of anecdotes for panels, some anecdotes for bar talk, but based on that, so it's never boring work. It can be crazy. I liken it to like lenders being on the being kind of like food critics, but as like developers, like you're in the kitchen just sweating, trying to create that plate, right? That perfect plate that everyone has on that checklist, right? It's like, all right. And no one sees what you're doing in the background to kind of create this product, and you're sweating and you're screaming at people in the kitchen. But when you present it, it's like a fancy plate, that at the same time. I feel like it's like that. It's adventurous work, and it's for a good cause. I love it.
I love that you threw in both a literary and a culinary metaphor in the same sentence, Naeem.
Just winging it. Just winging it.
Robert, why did Brooklyn lead the way in development during the last cycle? And do you expect that trend to continue?
You asked me a great question, especially, I was born and raised in Brooklyn, and I work for Impact Brooklyn, and, I'm just, very, very supportive of my hometown. So, I think Brooklyn is, just very unique, just in terms of the diversity that we have here, from, a racial, cultural, income, almost every standpoint, you can think about. And, when I was younger, I remember people, we learned all about the 5 boroughs, and I remember people saying to me, oh, I'm going to go to New York City. And I'm like, what are you talking about? We're in Brooklyn. We are in New York City. And people, when they would say New York City, they would only be referring to Manhattan. And that was like the focus where everyone wanted to be. And, suddenly that changed. And now, Brooklyn, real estate became hotter than Manhattan real estate. Families who had wealth and had money wanted to still opt to live in Brooklyn, versus Manhattan. And, I think there is a lot that goes into that, and one part is community. I know a lot of people that live in many parts of Manhattan and Queens and Staten Island. And, from what I see, they just don't have the same type of community, that we have, in Brooklyn. And I think, a piece of that is the businesses, the organizations, just block to block, all the different block associations you have, in Brooklyn. And in that, it's a simple, to me, why Brooklyn real estate got real hot. It's just simply supply and demand. There just become a lot of demand to want to be here, want to move here, and just limited supply. So that's really, drove up the market, and I think will continue. There's not a lot of places to build in Brooklyn, so that's not going to, the actual supply is probably not going to change significantly, and I think the demand will, continue to be here. So, that's kind of my outlook in the future. And that's why it's so important to do what Impact Brooklyn and everyone on this call does, trying to support, our, not just Brooklyn, but, our boroughs, and try to create, more housing, which is, as Naeem said, is not an easy thing to do when you're trying to create any housing, and especially affordable housing, in any borough, but especially Brooklyn.
Thank you. Yeah. Pivoting to Janet. Janet, we heard you had a background previously in commercial banking during our call earlier. Can you talk a little bit about pivoting from that background into affordable development? What was that process like?
Sure. So I was going to say that your question to me was my personal pivot. I think your
Yes.
question to Christine next is the pivot during the pandemic. So I don't want to overlap that. And so I was at a large community bank. M&T is a lot of different geographies strung together, but its history is as a community bank. So dealing with your customers is very personal. You're dealing with principals and families. I was in Westchester, so it's a smaller market than New York City. What you see here is constrained resources that are not necessarily within my control, or maybe my borrower's control. For example, Impact Brooklyn. Everyone is dependent upon HPD or HCR or HUD or LIHTC, that there be enough resources to fund this. And, it's very impressive to see what New York has managed to do, but the need, as everyone constantly talks about, is so much greater. And I have not seen, being in this field full-time 2 years, I would expect me to see the solution that Better Minds have probably been looking for decades. But there is really no other way meaningfully that deals are going forward without government subsidy, because that's how you offset the affordable, the lower rents, and the construction cost doesn't really change from a market rate project to an affordable project. I mean, maybe if you want to pick at it and say it's the level of the finishes or the amount of marble in the kitchen, but it's really part and parcel of the fact that on one side of the scale, you have the same cost, and on the other side of the scale, you have less income coming in. There's a lot of players in these deals. There's an awful lot of lead time. Teams of people trying to work together and get it done, many of whom work on overlapping projects. And this all adds to the expense, again, not in a critical manner, but just in the realistic sense of what it really takes to launch these ships.
Thank you. Thank you, Janet. Christine, we heard that you pivoted from HPD to LISC recently. What was it like to pivot during a pandemic?
Well, the need is always there, right? So I went from managing a program focused on rehabbing city-owned properties, converting them to cooperative. So providing home ownership for first-time homeowners, predominantly BIPOC homeowners. And then using that experience and moving into LISC New York City, where we have a focus, a lens of enhancing or supporting BIPOC wealth generation. And so, you know, it felt like a natural fit making that transition. You know, full disclosure, I was at LISC back in 2010. So it wasn't a total coming home because I was on the national side previously, but you know, coming back to LISC, it feels like the right fit. LISC is you know, I think a very important organization within New York City, and like I said, part of my role is to expand the work that we're doing. So I'm looking forward to partnering and you know, getting our name out there and getting our work more encompassing of the city.
Thank you. And last, again, Michael, can you describe how a consultant pivots into development? You mentioned BJH's work in the public sector, but also some of your development work. What was that process like? And how did it come about?
Thank you, Renee. Well, it's for one thing, it's a work in progress, very much. Both my partner and I worked for the city, mostly the Economic Development Corporation, for you know, roughly a decade. I left the EDC sort of in the depths of the Great Recession, and kind of wanted to do something different. And I figured a recession was a good time to do it, oddly enough, and started doing a little bit of consulting. And I sort of knew about, you know, there were certain very discrete areas of the market that I understood. I sort of understood the commercial incentives and actually zoning incentives. One of the things that we started doing was helping larger developers submit on RFP processes, mostly in a sort of a technical way, sort of doing some underwriting, but also some positioning, some sort of strategic thinking about how to approach the agencies, EDC, HPD, et cetera. We sort of evolved from there towards putting deals together. At the same time, we continued to work for the agencies, sort of being on the other side, bringing the private market perspective to the public agencies, helping them sort of understand what the market was really looking for, what we're, where we're underwriting inputs that were appropriate, what the developer returns were appropriate, and where you could push back on them. So we've really felt that we were an honest broker, sort of an honest middleman, that we fiercely advocate for our public sector clients, and when we're on the other side of the table, the same with our private sector clients. Where we've sort of evolved recently is doing some smaller projects. We were sort of swinging for the fences, looking at 300 and 500 unit, 1,000 unit, 80/20 projects for large developers, and we had some success there. But we've actually sort of gravitated now towards some smaller projects where we could, put our little bit of capital together. We're actually, I think I was just on a call with Janet Lauren recently on this one commercial project that we're doing that I can't talk about yet because it's not quite public. And we're hoping the LISC will look at financing it. Again, a small project where we're bringing our really quite deep knowledge of the public sector process and the development process at this point, a little bit of capital and a lot of hard work. So that's kind of the path that we've been, as you say, to pivot. I would say it's more of a 10-year transition.
Thank you, Michael. So I want to get to some questions for the panelists and audience. We will open the floor up to Q&A after this round of questions. So start thinking about what you'd like to hear from this group. But Naeem, if you could start with you again. What are the biggest hurdles facing MBWE and community-based developers? And how has the sector changed since you first got started in affordable development?
That is a loaded question, just to throw that on my shoulders. But let me start with the second part first. How about that? A lot has changed when I was in Carthage. When I got out of college, I got a job at CPC and worked at CPC and kind of cut my teeth there on the real estate finance side. Worked for a small commercial bank for a little bit, but then 2008 was 2008, and 2008 happened, and the worst place to be in 2008/2009 was a small commercial bank that had too much on their portfolio. So I was kind of just doing a lot of consulting in between 2009 and 2010, doing some other entrepreneurship ventures, just kind of doing my thing, and had a great mentor, Ed Poteet, who I would just bounce a lot of ideas back and forth. And he was like, why don't you just consult for me? So I started working on the dark side of development, right? And it was not easy work, because it was 2010, and a lot of the work was basically save this project because the market has turned, and come up with creative ways to kind of pivot with the projects that had great intentions, but because the market has changed, we need to kind of, figure out and rejigger how this development is going to go. And sometimes mid-development, it wasn't like things were still haven't closed yet. It was like we are closed, we are going construction, and we might need to refi this as rental, or from affordable home ownership, or what are ways to kind of preserve affordable home ownership and really make more concerted efforts to market to the right folks. So one of my first projects was in East New York. Also, shout out to Devon Prello, who was also a project manager at Carthage. We're sitting next to each other, griping about the market and everything, and talking about economics and all kinds of things. That it was definitely tough. But what was a lot easier about it is that there were still more options for MWBE developers like Carthage and other folks, and even nonprofit developers to kind of get at that may not have been extremely large projects for like the big boys, that were kind of mid-tier, that were under, kind of a little bit under the radar, that HPD still had a good amount of subsidy for, and you were able to get. Nowadays, it's definitely way more competitive, and lending requirements are way more stringent since the last recession, and rightfully so. But that has impacted the access to capital and access to the market for a lot of MWBE developers and nonprofit developers. I don't want to speak for Rob. Rob can jump in at any time when it comes to that. So not putting words in his mouth, anything like that. But it is a little tough. Even when I was consulting, I can give you an example. So working at Carthage, we did one of the first RAD projects in Jersey when RAD was still pilot. So, but it was RAD 2. So it was for Section 236, which in New York State is known as Mitchell-Lama properties, right? So Section 236 was kind of precursor to Section 8 properties. So, you know, we got pretty skilled at RAD, and we did quite a few projects in both New York State and New Jersey. When I pivoted to Urbane and drunk the Kool-Aid of the founder James Johns Pyatt, there was a guy who was in Plainfield who was a Black real estate developer, but it wasn't necessarily his original thing. He kind of pivoted into it. He was in the music industry. He made a lot of money off of production, and he was kind of like taking that money and buying a lot of real estate in his hometown in Plainfield, New Jersey, also in Atlanta, and also in Florida. And he amassed about 400 units, and he was kind of doing this thing. But he landed on this particular HUD property, and he didn't know how to go about all the legal loopholes. And there are a lot when it comes to this, to try to pivot. So I kind of jumped in at the last moment when HUD was trying to shut down the property in Jersey, and was like, hey, look, I know how to do this. Let's figure this out. We do a lot of the work, and we try to get a lender to kind of refi or kind of provide a bridge to construction loan. His net worth was around $2 million, which isn't nothing to sneeze at, right? A paltry $2 million. But in order for us to do the job, is, the requirements were like a $5 million net worth requirement, right? So literally I had to find a JV partner, and it was a nationwide partner that kind of snatches up properties like this all the time, and give them a majority stake when most of the work had technically been done, and the expertise was there, and he basically, he's grateful that he got it done and completed, because through that program, he basically doubled his money kind of like overnight, but at the same time, he had to give up a majority stake in order to kind of get the loan guarantees that he needed, right? So, and this is a guy whose net worth is $2 million, right? So when we're dealing with, nonprofit developers, CDCs, when we're dealing with kind of low to mid-tier MWE developers, finding that capital in order to make something feasible and execute it, often requires JV partnerships where the big guy is just going to be, provide the loan guarantees and the bank guarantees. And you're still a little bit on the treadmill trying to eventually get that sense of autonomy through reps, but there's just greater barriers to entry there, right? Not to say it's impossible, not, the American dream is dead. I'm not saying that. I'm saying there definitely can be obstacles, and because of the changes in the economy, because of the availability of city-owned property, especially from the 90s and 2000s to now, it definitely becomes a lot harder. I hope that answers your question.
And I'll jump in there. The same issue with nonprofit developers. It's really the access to capital and the balance sheet. Not being able to have that strong balance sheet to do bigger deals. And then when you can't do those bigger deals, you get pushed out from bigger developers because they have scale, and not only can they do the bigger deals, but they can do it cheaper because of economies of scale. So it's hard for you to compete.
Thanks,
especially in this New York market.
Yeah.
Everything just gets heightened in the New York market.
Thanks, Robert. You opened, Robert, mentioning supply and demand dynamics. Can you talk a bit about whether you see or other policy programs the next mayor should consider to address the growing affordable and supportive housing needs relative to that market constraint that you and Naeem have both begun to describe?
Yes, Impact Brooklyn, we're a member of many different coalitions for affordable housing, and one of them is United for Housing, and that was kind of, we have a design structure in which, we put a platform together to advise the new mayor on affordable housing policies. And we did have the opportunity to meet with all the Democratic candidates for mayor, except for one who was invited but didn't show up. I won't name who that person was, but we were able to meet with just about all the candidates, including Eric Adams, who's like the forerunner right now to become the next mayor. And he basically, agreed with, all of our recommendations. And, his policy, I think, is somewhat progressive. He really has a focus on, creating new housing wherever we can create new housing. And a piece of that is really on upzoning. Upzoning is basically, building higher, building more housing in areas that, typically may not have a lot of housing, and creating like live work communities, places that were traditionally more office or retail, having more housing there, which makes a lot of sense, especially in New York City where people are commuting. My daughter has soccer games in Randall's Island. Now it takes me 2 hours just to drive there for her games, with all this traffic post-COVID. And it just makes to have people living, near where they work. Some other concepts, really working with faith-based institutions to create, ways where and guidance where they can help create housing. A lot of faith-based institutions still own a lot of land in New York City, and they just don't have the expertise to like utilize it. We partnered with a Seventh-day Adventist church in Brooklyn on a 64-unit senior project, recently, which is turning out to be very successful. And, not only in the fact that it builds housing, but the way that we structured the deal, we actually become tenants to the owner, and the owner is their church. So they're getting, an annual revenue stream, from the project, which helps the church, just become sustainable over the long term. And also, you have a lot of these, large developers that are building affordable housing, but, at Impact Brooklyn, we have the kind of thought that, housing is really your kind of core need. And yes, if you're homeless, you need housing, but if you're homeless and you get an apartment, that's not going to just solve all your problems. For a developer that just builds a housing and is not, supporting you in any other way. So, kind of our housing first model is to supply the housing, but then supply resources to job training, to healthcare, to mental health. Mental health is a big issue that's not out there in affordable housing. A lot of people who don't have jobs, they don't have jobs not just because they're lazy, they don't want to work. A lot of them have really mental illness that's not being treated at all. So that's one reason. And I know Eric Adams, he's also has this concept of maybe, using city assets and relocating city buildings in Manhattan to the outer boroughs to create more space in Manhattan for people to live, but then also, again, having people who could, buy apartments, rent apartments, in the outer boroughs close to the city offices, where they work. So that makes sense. And also, I think Eric Adams is also talking about technology. He's one of his concepts is to use drones to do building inspections. And as a developer, you get bogged down in the process to build new construction, and the time that it takes to do inspections and to clear violations and in preservation projects is just erroneous, and it really can cause projects to stall, projects to go over budget. So implementing technology, I think, any way we can to make this whole process more efficient and cheaper. And the key is that we're providing affordable housing and rents that are a lot lower than market. So in order to provide those rents, we have to cut costs out somewhere, to pay for all this and to kind of ease some of the burden that Janet mentioned. Otherwise, you just are relying on government subsidies to fund these projects. And, there's not an infinite amount of government subsidies that are out there each year. So you have to do that balancing act. We have to find other ways, to fund these projects. If we want to create more housing, we can't just rely on government subsidies. We got to figure out ways to lower costs or, create more efficiencies or to, leverage, private funding more for these projects.
Thank you.
I think we're in the right direction with how, some of the politicians are thinking about affordable housing, especially it's in the forefront. And I think it had to be in the forefront because of COVID and the big homeless problem we have. But, and I think a lot of good ideas are out there, but, we need people to turn it into reality.
I hope we have some engineers on the call tonight. I like that vision of drone-based inspections. There's a business there. Going on, Janet, LISC investment has resulted in close to 450,000 units of housing and 74 million square feet of commercial, retail, and community space. What impact has that development had on communities where LISC invests? And how does LISC achieve this scale?
So let me comment first on LISC's focus, how it shifted even in the 2 years that I've been here. I've seen a strategy to shift because it's looking to heighten its impact. So LISC has about a $500 million loan portfolio. And by the scale of other lenders, that's not very big, and it's national. LISC's loans were smaller, they were spread all over the country. LISC borrows with bonds to fund those loans. It's sort of like batching it, borrow it and lend it. A lot of it is bonds that LISC has issued. And that causes you to have to be pretty attentive to what Naeem said, lending more stringently, because this is actually Moody's rated bonds. And you have to do certain things if you want to have your rating and keep your borrowing rate there. And since you're passing through your borrowing rate, right, with your spread and your costs, it's just the key to the whole thing. So one of the things that was going on when I came here was I saw a very deliberate look at other funding sources. And so a lot of funding in affordable housing has come from banks, CRA, right? So you could argue that the people who are required to pay CRA because maybe they have not been focused enough on certain communities are now the people who are funding this industry. It's sort of a quandary there. And so LISC was looking at other funding sources. There's a group within LISC that has been very active with sports teams like, the NFL, because they have been looking to, get money from that industry. And specifically, they were, creating sports facilities within communities. And so that was, you can see that was an attempt to find different funding sources. Once Black Lives Matters and COVID and all the political things that have happened recently, there's been a lot more money looking to get into helping. And that money can find national, easily identified, longstanding, high reputation entities and say, here, let me create a fund through you. But what's being struggled with a little bit now and is evolving is how do you match that money to need? If that money comes in looking a lot like the money that's borrowed from the bonds, where it has to be at this rate and it has to be returned, it can't take a certain level of risk and it can't be the low cost that you as a developer might need. So I think that how that money comes in and whether it comes in, as loans, as grants, as credit enhancement, it's all very new and evolving rapidly. So I'm really excited to learn as this process continues and see where that can evolve too, because it seems so important. Another thing that LISC was doing was it was trying to move focus from housing to economic development. That's what Michael Miola is referencing. And also LISC was opening offices, they call it rural. They wanted to really get out into, communities all over America, rather than a city like New York City, which may be fairly well served already. So I did see LISC, trying to refocus its efforts, and it's very much, I think, something that is still in a state of transition and still relatively new, as it is, in lots of places in this country right now.
Thank you, Janet. Thank you for that answer. Christine, keeping on Janet's description of how LISC creates impact, we've discussed, or can you describe LISC's 3 pillars for capital assistance and capital strategy? And has LISC found specific interventions that have had the greatest ROI on impact and improved well-being? And what are those inventions or interventions?
Sure. So in April 2020, when Valerie White became the executive director of LISC New York City, there were 3 pillars that were announced to define our investment strategy. So those pillars are radical healing to counter racial bias and inequity, inclusive economic transformation to prioritize talent, diverse enterprises, and then also sustainable wealth generation through things like homeownership and asset building, and career ladders. So the way that we have sort of focused in practicum on these pillars, we just launched something called the Developers of Color Training. It's a plan over the next several years to train over 85 organizations, smaller organizations, some years of experience, having difficulty sort of attaining the capital that we've been talking about, that MWBE groups may struggle to get access to, working with them not just to obtain capital or apply for RFPs and RFQs, but also helping them to build teams on these projects, because as we all know, a developer is one group that makes up a project, right? There's many other partners that come together on a particular project. And if we don't have a successful team, we don't have a successful project. And one wrong project, unfortunately, can be, sort of the namesake of an organization going forward. So sort of working with organizations to help ensure that they have the structure necessary to successfully achieve or obtain capital, work through projects, get to the other side, not build up too fast, but not, take it too slow either. So that's a program that we've just launched. We are in the application review status. We have about 15 organizations that we'll work with in our first 12 organizations that we'll work with in our first round. We've also been working, we've established a New York City Small Business Relief and Recovery Fund. So we're working with 16 business development organizations to provide technical assistance to BIPOC-owned small businesses. That's in response to COVID and the downturn in a lot of communities all over New York City. And basically, in addition to investing in things like homeownership and investing in, affordable housing, these are the other metrics or the other investments that we're making to ensure that we're aligning with the pillars that we stated in April 2020.
Thank you, Christine. Michael, what are some ways that policymakers can use zoning as a lever to increase affordable housing development and make it easier to develop additional housing stock and improve well-being, since that's also something Naeem mentioned early on? So how can zoning help us pull those levers?
Sure, and I think either Naeem or Robert or both actually referred to, to upzonings and zoning policy, as an important lever. And it's definitely not the be all end all, but I do think it has been and can be in a new administration an important lever to to expand capacity for residential and commercial space. I think the current administration came in with a very expansive agenda with mandatory inclusionary housing and ZQA, and the plans to rezone 15 neighborhoods around the city, and I think they've only done a few of those. It's very my background in this was I was very involved in the Hudson Yards rezoning, and to a lesser extent West Chelsea and some other areas. And Hudson Yards generally not considered an affordable housing, and this is the district. It's the 50 block area, not the related mega tower project, but it's a 50 block area of West Midtown, and the whole area was rezoned from mostly M zoning to a fairly high density from 6.5 to 12 FAR residential and commercial. I think about 10 or 15,000 units have been built in the area. Many market, but many 80-20, 70-30 buildings. And hold on a second, I'm losing the light. So I would not hold up Hudson Yards or Greenpoint Williamsburg for that matter as a model for every neighborhood or every application, but I do think that New York City as a high density city, which has historically been for a century, has room for for more density. So that's one thing. Some more specifics. This might be a niche issue, but a couple of people have referred to working with churches and other nonprofit organizations, monetizing their land and their development rights. I would also say that the landmarks and the landmarks zoning mechanisms, which allow some very limited transfers to support landmark properties, are extremely technical, time intensive, and expensive. We helped the church in Brooklyn sell some air rights to restore the church, and they sold into an 80-20 type project. It had to go through ULURP. I forget, it was not only landmarks process, but a full ULURP. It was successful. It was a 2-year process, and everything lined up perfectly. And it happened, 2 or 3 years ago. But it was very hard, very challenging. So I actually think and some of the historic preservation community has been discussing, liberalizing and systematizing that landmarks mechanism as a way, again, to help historic assets, but also can generate housing and commercial space. The other thing not on the zoning topic that I just want to mention in the policy area is this panel's on affordable housing, but the other side of the coin is if people have good jobs that pay well, they can afford housing. And I think the last, 2 administrations have at times had effective commercial policy agendas, but truthfully have not, could do more, could have done more. And and I think that there, in a new administration, there is an opportunity, possibly for using zoning to facilitate commercial and community facility development, but also using the levers of, tax policy and regulation to, encourage, businesses that pay well. The other project that we worked on with with Janet Lauren's organization and Christine's organization, LISC, was an affordable commercial development in East Williamsburg with Evergreen, a 10,000 square foot commercial building that's being renovated and transformed into makerspace. Tiny project. It's nearly done with construction, but took an immense effort. But that immense effort will pay off with well-paying industrial jobs that probably will strengthen that community. So with those kind of two areas, maybe I'll take a break and then see if there are other questions.
Thank you, Michael. Appreciate that thorough answer. So that actually brings me to the end of my questions. I'll turn to the audience and ask if there are any questions that you'd like to field from the panelists. I have one that's come in already. I'll read that. Don't be shy. So our first question is, does Eastern Parkway present opportunities for affordable housing? Maybe that's a Robert question, or?
Did you say Eastern Parkway?
Yes.
I mean, Eastern Parkway, I don't know if you've looked to see what, rents are on Eastern Parkway, but I mean, there's just a lot of challenges with Eastern Parkway. And it's not just the value of real estate on Eastern Parkway. I mean, it's the community on Eastern Parkway, which is a combination of, high Caribbean population, high Hasidic population that have different kind of ownership dynamics. There's not a lot of available land on Eastern Parkway. So, I mean, there's just a lot of challenges, on that strip. And also that strip, I actually read or I saw a documentary, something about Eastern Parkway, how it was kind of meant to be and one of the largest green spaces like in the world, and it was meant to almost be the whole Eastern Parkway, like almost a park leading to Prospect Park, another park. So kind of the whole idea, the concept of Eastern Parkway is to have housing, but also to have it open, to have cars driving back and forth, having park space where people could enjoy the park. So the concept of just building a whole lot of new housing in the Eastern Parkway, I don't think would go over so good because of the park concept, all the traffic on Eastern Parkway, and the other dynamics in cost, and just not a lot of supply of land there.
Thank you, Robert. Anyone else wants to tackle that question? If no takers, no other questions from the audience. I had one other question I was sort of curious to ask. I'm not sure who would want to field this, but Michael, you mentioned MIH, mandatory inclusionary housing, earlier. When you look back on the last few years of MIH in New York, how do you grade the policy?
Oh, that's a tough one. And I wouldn't mind somebody else picking up. I think it's a great policy, but one of the challenges has been that it's had to be implemented through rezonings, and you really need to go neighborhood by neighborhood. So I think it's and I think Janet referred to the slowness. One of the other one of the other things, and this may be controversial, New York has a history of having as of right zoning, and we've been moving steadily towards more bespoke and crafted special districts with more complex and convoluted requirements. I think there's costs there. So, it would be nice, it would be interesting to see if the new administration can come in and, really think about some policies that, set parameters, and then we'll let the market, go within reasonable, guidelines. But maybe somebody else would pick up on that.
I just wanted to comment. So this is an example of people who are running programs trying to be innovative. They're trying to find something other than subsidy dollars, right, to be able to do more affordable housing. So whether the government collects less taxes because these are now have tax exemptions versus, putting out subsidy dollars, I leave it to you, but it's still in a way circling around government capacity, right? The other thing that I heard with the inclusionary is that it started driving bigger projects. It probably brought more of the for-profit developers into this arena, as I think Renee referenced at the top of the call. And although these things can have multiple income bands, they can also tend to push to the higher AMI bands. So, another example of not using direct subsidy would be inclusionary housing, where they bonused certain neighborhoods and let you take that extra space and trade it to a project a couple of blocks away. In other words, sort of like an air rights game. So you can see how creative the people who have been creating programs in this industry have tried to be in the past, because the challenges and the solutions that they're looking for. It was interesting to see that question come in about this type of program, and I wanted to just twist it around and show it in that aspect of it, the creativity that's gone into trying anything that seems like you can make it work, to also bring more to the table.
I agree. I think the intent is good, right? I think the intent of mandatory MIH and then inclusionary housing, like Janet said, is good. Inclusionary housing is kind of as of right. So if you find, for example, if you find a building that's in an inclusionary housing zone, then you get a bonus for building more affordability. What Michael was talking about was the MIH, where the only reason why MIH is included is when you're trying to upzone, and when you're trying to upzone, they're saying, because we allowed you, even though you spent like $2-3 million to go through ULURP, right? Because we allowed you to do this, there's still a certain amount of affordability that you have to kind of put on, which is good and it's noble. I just don't feel like, in terms of a common denominator based on the need of New Yorkers today. I mean, homelessness is at an all-time high. It's definitely crazy, and especially in neighborhoods where there are high rates of homelessness. There's also high rates of in terms of rents going up and up through gentrification, right? So yes, it can be helpful to have some of these policies, but there definitely needs to be, and it's hard in New York City, but there definitely needs to be larger policies that move the needle a little bit more. I'm curious to see what they are. I know I don't have all the answers, but I think it's absolutely needed. And you can tell that things are a little bit upside down, and they kind of need to be rejiggered even within that space. We talked about Hudson Yards and rezoning it to residential, and I think that's great, because overall, if you kind of create market supply, it can hope to soften demand. But people have also, especially in New York, have created such a supply of I guess luxury housing based on just pure speculation and not necessarily demand, that even pre-COVID there was like a 50% vacancy rate for luxury housing that was built in the past 5 years, which is like ridiculous, while people are like out in the streets, like, you know, people are working 2 jobs and going home to like a homeless shelter with their family. You know what I'm saying? So there's I don't know, you know, obviously we're not trying to just shut the market down, but there needs to be a little bit more balance here in terms of creating affordable housing, as, you know, prioritizing affordable housing as infrastructure to make, you know, cities like function just efficiently, right? So, and that has to do with a lot. I think we talked about economic development as well. You know, industrial properties are getting few and far between. But now there's more of a focus on economic development in New York City. So how do we preserve some of the industrial properties that are left? But again, because the market can dictate saying, well, the highest and best use is probably going to be residential or office or something like that, it's easy for those industrial properties, especially that are for sale, or they're going to be a little bit overpriced for what manufacturing uses are. And I'm sure you see that in the market, Renee. You're a broker, you're out and about, and you see that. So there's a little mismatch there. So if we're trying to create community development like Rob does in terms of like maybe standalone space, and trust me, Rob in a former life, me and him tried to work on a project in Bed-Stuy that was just, oh my God, it was so hard. And we had EDC funding to do it, but there were so many loopholes in order to kind of create this standalone community facility space. It was so cumbersome. It became impossible to do. So, you know, I'm glad that RFPs in general have shifted the focus from just affordable housing, even though the need is there, to also affordable housing and economic development by creating kind of mixed use typologies. But we need to kind of figure out how do we subsidize that gap for community facility as well to kind of create economic development, and not just say, oh no, you guys are in 1,000-unit building or 500-unit building, 60-unit building. I've done enough for you, thrive and get jobs and get equity, and you know, it's just not going to work like that. So how do we catalyze some of the energy in our local economies, just like we do for global economies, right? There's a whole bunch of untapped potential in public housing. There's a bunch of untapped potential in tenement housing, Mitchell-Lama housing. There's a bunch of untapped potential in senior housing. You know, and we have a project in Flatbush Caton Market where the vendors, their average age is about 60, 65 years old, right? We call them elderpreneurs, and you know, we're helping them with business curriculums and you know, just trying to help give them, you know, better distribution pipelines for their products. And some people have great products, but they're like, I don't have time to do all this extra stuff because I want to go to church. And it's like, oh, that's fine. Just let us handle this and, you know, help you get more, you know, B2B business. You don't have to just sell to like the same 5 customers that walk into the store. You know, you can have a digital presence. There's other things that you can do. So kind of creating more incubators, accelerators. The thing with Evergreen, I heard about that, and you know, maker spaces, I'm all for. So kudos to that project as well. So I know I mentioned a lot here, and I know we were talking about zoning, but kind of thinking about where the gaps are in the market, and then applying policy to those gaps is extremely important. So I say all the things that I just said to say, hey, there's a gap in kind of creating viable economic development, which can create better long-term effects for the community, which can also create better profits long-term for investors by increasing the intrinsic value of the building and then increasing the intrinsic value of the neighborhood without having to just make luxury all everything, you know, like condo with Lamborghini doors, you know, or whatever, right? So I'm looking forward to hopefully the next administration like really putting their money where their mouth is and seeing what we can do.
Thank you for that great answer, Naeem.
Yeah.
We have.
Hey, Renee, I apologize, but I just have a community meeting that I need to get to. So I'm going to have to drop off, but it was great being part of this panel discussion. And if anyone, you know, wants to contact me about anything around affordable housing, especially in Central Brooklyn, definitely reach out to me. And my email is robert_jefferson@impactbk.org. But thanks again, everyone.
Yep. Thank you so much, Rob. We appreciate you. So as Robert signs off, I'll read the second question for the panelists. You've spoken about how the real estate space is difficult for small developers to break into in New York City regarding access to capital, pipeline, general competitive nature, etc. And as this is a very diverse panel, we'd love to hear more about your hopes and or trends that you are seeing for more MBWE visibility, both registered and non, in the development space. I'll leave it up to you. Who wants to take a swing at that one?
I mean, I would say take very seriously accreting all the experience that you need, all the different hats that need to be worn, or the people you need to get into your process to support you wearing those hats if you don't have that direct experience. Because any developer is bringing bunches of skill sets. It's not just building, it's finance, it's legal. And if you don't have those things covered, you can get hurt. And that's a huge challenge when you're an emerging organization and you can't just hire an executive in each of those disciplines. So one of the things that I would say in particular is life is long and it's a long trail. Make sure that you work in multiple places and get all the experience under your belt so that when you do feel empowered and knowledgeable enough to launch yourself, that you're in a way that you can protect yourself with the knowledge you need to make sure that you'll be successful going forward, because it's no small task. In the old days, you would see joint ventures. You mentioned selling, getting somebody in as your guarantor in return for points in the deal. But you have to flip that coin over and say, what does the guy get? I should say guy, woman, or whoever. What does that guy get for taking points in your deal? Is 20%, 50% of your deal worth staking millions of dollars if the deals blow up for equity injection? I don't think getting a partner strictly on the basis of the return of parking his guarantee is necessarily that feasible. So I think that is a really difficult area to get a partner. And maybe there will be a growing sense of mission, either in companies, large real estate companies, I see Helmsley's on this call, or funds, because that is a real hole in the support that is needed in the market.
Thank you, Janet.
I mean, I'm gonna second that. I told the little anecdote for a reason, because it was kind of like this guy was backed in a corner. He didn't have much of a choice, right? So if folks were able to provide those loan guarantees for MWBE developers to help them, or even if there was, personally, I'm tired of training programs personally, right? But because I feel like there's still a good amount of expertise out there for especially mid-tier MWBE developers. I think there still needs to be training in TA for everybody. There needs to be access for that, right? But I think there needs to be a shift towards making sure there's the capital and resource needs there as well. Because sometimes but even when it comes to job training, like it kind of ends there. There's no continuity, right? so you're still left with, high barriers of entry and kind of getting into the game. So, I think if, like Janet mentioned, if there was more policies or more availability to basically get guarantees without giving up so much equity, I think that would make a lot of sense. We are trying to build a community development fund right now, and we're soliciting everyone from, high net worth investors to foundations, to kind of create an equity fund where we can participate, and also non-accredited like community investors can also participate, right? So we can build community wealth on both sides, but then it lessens our issues that I just talked about in this anecdote that I bring up in every presentation, right? Where it's just kind of like, look, these are the barriers of entry. We have a good amount of expertise, we have a good plan, we just need the capital and the resources. And there's a large contingent of MWBEs that need that. And keep in mind, a lot of the big boys play in the 100+ space, right? So if you have 100 units or more, and you have a pretty good financial backing and loan balances, you can definitely do a tax credit deal, right? And you can pull off a tax credit deal that would be an as of right tax credit deal in New York City. So that's like 4% tax credits. But, if it's less than 100 units, tax credits aren't available. There are subsidy programs, but you're also going to be putting out a lot of equity out of your own pocket as well. So there's still a good amount of mid-tier type of properties available that are less than 100 units, but it's still a ton of equity that MWBE or emerging developers have to put out. So again, it's kind of give and take. And then if you have a higher property that has a higher unit count, most likely you're gonna have to JV. I don't mind JVing on a property that's like 400 units, and it's like, all right, great. I put in the expertise, I put in the work. I'm finding a larger partner to make sure that this gets done. But if there's something that we feel like we can get done as an emerging developer, but there's still these high barriers to entry on maybe like a 50, 40, 60 unit building, maybe those pathways can be eased a little bit as well.
Thank you, Naeem. So in the interest of time and making sure the panelists want to, sit on a CURE panel again, I'm going to ring the bell and conclude tonight's discussion. Thank you for joining us this evening. I hope you enjoyed the panel and found it educational and inspiring. As I mentioned at the opening of the program, I want to take some time to share more about the RISE initiative and CURE's annual gala in December. This year's CURE Gala will be another virtual gala and take place on December 9th. The gala will look at Real Estate 2.0 and explore non-traditional real estate industries. Make sure you're getting CURE emails by becoming a member or joining our mailing list to get the save the date. Lastly, if you are on our mailing list or subscribe to our social media, you have probably seen information about our RISE initiative with BizNow, of which BJH Advisors is a platinum sponsor. The RISE initiative gives firms an opportunity to self-nominate initiatives within 5 categories: recruitment and retention initiatives, mentorship programs and partnership to support more diverse workforce, fostering equality of opportunity within company culture, initiatives that actively address unconscious bias in corporate decision-making, and strategies to increase the visibility of minority representation at your firm. If you are a manager or firm who has implemented a policy that falls within any of those categories, or you're an employee who has experienced a policy within one of those categories, we encourage you to nominate your company or alert the appropriate manager to nominate your company for RISE's Firm Level Excellence Award. Details about the award and program are also on CURE's website. BizNow and CURE believe we can rise together. Thank you all and have a good night.
Thank you, everyone.
Thank you. All right.